All right, go ahead.
How's it going, Jake? Time for
Well,
another session of
what's
Reef
happening,
Therapy.
Mark? Yeah, we have quickly reached milestone number 20. This is, if you're listening to this on your podcast, that's cool. But this is the first session that is on its own channel, the Reef Therapy channel. So me and Mark can better keep track of your questions and comments and feedback. So if you're not subscribed to the Reef Therapy YouTube channel, make sure to do that now so you never miss, what is arguably one of the most in-depth reef conversations, pretty much every week.
Agreed. And, if you like to capture us on Spotify or Apple, that's fine too.
Yeah.
We'll be
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, so, man, you really got me thinking over the last few discussions. We text each other here and there in between these sessions, but really we try to save the conversation and let it kind of bubble and queue up, for these moments, right? Because if we're hashing it out over text or phone calls, then like when we do these, we'd have nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
So a couple of things, like one was a few episodes back, you brought up a really good point about, people hiding their imperfections in reef keeping, right? And so your average hobbyist is like, oh man, I'm dealing with Valonia, Aptasia, I got this, I got that. And it was just good for us all to share that we all struggle, right?
Hashtag reef reality.
There you go.
Yeah.
So on top of that, when you are having problems with some of your corals, right? And then even the fluke issue with your Centropyge, oh man, is it Acanthops?
Yes, sir. For
Um,
African flameback angelfish.
for those, yeah. But you were like, I'm not okay with this. I need to start figuring this stuff out. So all those ideas started to gel together in my brain about, I think another important thing for us maybe to discuss is that this hobby never stops teaching you, and there's always something to learn, and there's always levels of doubt that persist in your mind no matter how many years you've been doing the hobby, right? So I thought we would talk about that. Partly we could get into things that maybe we're not 100% sure about, or we question, or we're like, or even just, just having like that, sharing some learning experiences, I guess would be a good way to put it.
Yeah, no, I got a nice list, but I definitely have to tell you about some of the things that happened this week.
Oh, let's start small talk. Let's share some of our
but
ongoings.
the overall conversation, once we hit the pavement, we're going to be talking about just, nonstop learning, always learning, and just kind of how all those lessons or all those lessons just fit into a larger narrative. Because I think I have one word that describes all of my learning over the last 20 years. But I want to start, just a little low key. So a lot of people have been asking us for the really fun coral and fish ID cartoon posters. I don't know what happened. I mean, it must have gone, like, hit a viral strain or something on the socials, because I've gotten so many messages about it. And we're going to have another print run coinciding with a local fish store Saturday, right after Black Friday. So that's going to be a really big campaign, and we're going to make sure those posters are at a lot of fish stores. I know a lot of people have been asking, so this is one way to get the word out to even more people.
Excellent.
The other thing is, I don't know if you know, but we actually have a sponsor for the show.
What?
I don't listen. Yeah, we've had a sponsor for a few sessions now. I don't. We do this reef therapy, so we know what we said, so I don't listen to it. So if you don't listen to it, you don't know that we have a sponsor. And we're never going to have to talk about it, but because that's just going to be inserted before or in the audio stream without our intervention. But yesterday, I went to ICP Analysis, which is is a sponsor of Reef Therapy. So surprise.
Nice.
But anyway, it's run by Steve Visser. And he's here in Denver, Colorado, like 15 minutes away. And he's one of the companies that has been offering ICP analysis as a service to test your aquarium water. So I went over there yesterday. And first of all, man, he's got He's got the Apoma Labs blue phantom angelfish that looks like one of those crazy half-striped, half-spotted blue lines that you see sometimes in pictures from Taiwan. Seeing it in person, I was like, what the heck? So this is a captive bred hybrid between a blue line angelfish and the black phantom angelfish, which is all black, blue lines, all blue lines. And oh my God, that fish is turning out awesome. I've seen a few and they're just kind of like bluish gray towards the front of their mostly black body, but those lines are developing to something really, really special. That was awesome.
That's great. I wanted to pick up one of their fish, and they were, well, the ones that weren't sold out were the ones I could not afford. But
there's that. He also had a blue line and two conspics in a separate tank, but the blue phantom, oh my Lord! I think Rob Muget. I got a couple snapshots with my phone. Yeah. I wouldn't say I got any photographs, that are worthy of sharing. But I was there to talk to him just about kind of the new direction that he's taking. And I just want to touch on this, not for the sponsor part, but just for the hobbyist. So pretty much every inductively coupled plasma ICP testing service uses optical emission spectrometry. God, I always screw that one up. ICP OES. They all use ICP OS. That's what's been commonly available. So he offers that, but he's in addition to that, he's offering a new service. It's ICP Mass. So it's ICP Mass Spectrography. Spectrography? God, spectrography. Oh my God, this is so hard to say. But anyway, it just offers like 2 orders of magnitudes more sensitivity to all the trace elements. So it's more precise and more accurate down to those levels that we're looking for. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. But man, really excited to get all my tests, put together and queued up. And he's got an app that makes it just so freaking easy to just scan a QR code. And I'm just really lucky that he's local and a sponsor. That I'm going to be able to just like rain test samples on him and really like dig into some of these trace elements and what they need to be at and how my corals respond to just tiniest bumps of zinc and tiny little injections of iron and lots of esoteric elements. So kind of really excited to start really being able to do that with a fast turnaround time.
That's cool. Yeah. That's interesting because I was kind of going down that lane myself actually about starting to bring back some ICP testing.
So you were talking about.
Hold on one sec. There we go. Oh, no, it's just funny you brought up the ICP because I was going to bring that up later. Part of it was just subtle observations in some of the corals, and this kind of goes back to the learning, and we could talk about it later, but part of that equation was like, one, I've had some skepticism about food, right? Feeding corals, but the other piece that I was not skeptical about, but it was just like there's not a lot of like fruity knowledge about different elements, right? I mean, you hear, potassium helps the blues and this and that, but it's like there's nothing really
Does
big.
It really?
Yeah, there's not enough for me to chew on there, right? But
there's no meat on the bone. Every time one of these things comes up, and I've done a bunch of these ICP tests with a lot of different service providers, and then you reach out to them and you get like this crazy, usually weird non-answer.
Yeah.
They're like, it needs to be at this because of seawater levels. And I'm just like, but does it really? Like, I don't know. Just demonstrate this. Because the first thing I'll do is I'll go to Google Scholar, type in, coral or color or health, and then the element, and nothing really comes back. So it hasn't really been dug into. And so you've seen, some anecdotal reports. I think that there's more barium or boron in coral reefs or in marine areas that have a lot of trichophilias, but that's just one person saying it. I'm like, all right, well let's get more data.
Yeah.
So another thing is I finally got myself some more abalones.
Are those the ones from Unique Corals?
Yes. You saw my big abalones when you were here a month ago. So I've wanted to add more to all the tanks for like a really freaking long time. So I just kept, like going up the flagpole, but like, hey, send some abalone towards America. And then Bali Aquarium got some, and then he sent some to Unique Corals, and I got 10 of them today. And it's super interesting because the 3 that I have are ass ear abalone. That's what they're called, ass ear abalone, Haliotis asinina. And the ones that I got today, I got 10 of them. They're a hybrid, a hybrid between 2 tropical species, asinina and squamata. And there is no pictures of what these things are supposed to look like when they're, of the hybrids. I'm like, oh my God, are they going to have hybrid vigor and grow even bigger than the ass ear anemone? Not super sure, but I'm just super excited to get some more. And so now I was able to actually spread them around. So I don't just have the 3 in the coral flats. Now I have 2 of them in 3 different tanks, and then I added 2 more pairs to some of the coral flats that have the most light. And I'm just super tickled to finally get some more, because they're awesome animals, super hardy, very big, graze algae like freaking crazy. Like I couldn't point to any hair algae to any of my tanks that have the abalones in them. I'm not saying they're going to solve all your problems, but once you have things in check, they will do a lot of work. I saw the article on Reef Builders and went to Unique Corals to look for them, but I didn't see them available either yet, or I missed the boat, which I normally do because I'm always late to the party. I think when I shared that article, they hadn't been posted up for sale yet.
Oh, okay.
So I just got them today. So if you want them, jump on that.
Well, this doesn't show up on YouTube till tomorrow, right? So I got a minute or 2.
Yeah, I got a little bit of head start.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
How's your angelfish doing? How's your angelfish doing?
Better.
Yeah. Oh, yes, good.
So go ahead.
I reached out to some experts, and they had the very non-constructive feedback as, hey, don't feed them that food anymore.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, so for, I guess, those listening, so I got, from TSM, I got a regal angel and I got a swallowtail angel, and they showed up when, within minutes of arriving, they were eating pellets and everything I threw at them. And I think I got a little overzealous and excited about that. So every day I was feeding them heavily. Part of it too was they've been in shipment, get them acclimated, give food to everybody, reduce aggression, blah, blah, blah. And it was interesting because the one thing I hadn't fed to the tank was flake food. And I've got some marine flake foods, and I won't mention the manufacturer because I don't want to run them through the mud. It's not, I don't think it's their fault, right? That this food has been good for me in other cases. But interestingly enough, after I fed the flake food, both the new angels had distended bellies, and they stopped eating. And
they got that bloat.
Yeah, and then you start Googling, and it's the typical freshwater goldfish advice of feed them peas, add Epsom salt to the tank, and I'm like, well, okay, magnesium is one of the most abundant elements in seawater, so that ain't gonna help. And an angel that's not eating ain't gonna eat peas, it's not eating anything. So I just kind of waited it out, and I just hoped for the best. And then this morning I threw in some food and they ate, and I was like, hallelujah.
Oh man, I'm so happy for you, because it's funny, because what you're saying ties right back into my overarching thoughts of always learning. I lost a black phantom angelfish. I had one of the first pairs. I just got a little happy with some pellets one night, and it's crazy how easy it can happen. Yeah. Just got a little overzealous with the pellets. He looked a little bloated, looked amazing and fine and super healthy. Didn't eat for 2 weeks, and then that was a bummer, man. I really missed that fish. That fish was freaking cool. You were nervous, right?
Yeah, and it was funny because last week when we did the reef therapy and I brought up this great fish that I got, I remember ending that session going, well, now the fish is going to die, right? Because I talked about it. I have this weird superstition that if you name a fish, or, you talk about, oh, I got this awesome new coral, new fish, next day that thing's dead, right?
Dude, I have the same one here. my wife and, helper, I'm just like, don't talk about it too much. Don't look at it directly. It'll know, and then it'll die. It's just one of those weird superstitions. But man, my corals are looking so good, even compared to when you were here. I think I've just been very careful about bringing up my nutrients, and at night, every couple of weeks or something, I'll shine a flashlight on the acros at night just to gauge how much their polyp extension is. But last night, it looked like a soft coral tank in there.
Dang.
Oh my God. I mean, corals that are 3 inches apart, their polyps are so far out that they're almost touching. It was insane. I was like, what the hell? What's going on here? It's a really good time to enjoy these reef tanks here at the studio.
You got to savor the good times, right? Because inevitably at some point there'll be something, but when it's coasting and going well, you really got to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm there right now. Oh God, I'm really trying not to get ahead of myself on the overall conversation because I still have a couple things, but everything ties back into this one overarching thing for the lessons. So I've been asking some reefers what books they have because we spend a lot of money on our corals and our fish and our equipment and putting stuff together. And do you know what they tell me? They don't have any books.
Yeah.
Newer reefers and current reefers have 0 books. They don't even say, oh, I have 1 or 2 of these, or I have a couple of them. Like some of them do, but I doubt they're like cracking them open. But most of them are just like, I don't really have any books. I got a couple coral magazines or whatever. But yeah, pretty much get all my information online. I'm like, how can you not have a starting point of reference to judge everything that you're being told or that everybody's telling you? Because if you just do online, you're listening to an echo of an echo of an echo from somebody's idea 12 years ago that didn't pan out. And it's just like really startling because I'm over here, a few times a week. I jump over here to just research one quite quick little fact, just to fact check myself and others. And I don't know what I would do without the library as far as like really having that firm, reference frame. I know you got a ton of books.
I do, and the one thing I would say is I can't really blame those people that don't have the books because when people have asked me for recommendations, all these books are out of print, right? I mean, you can find used copies on Amazon, but so much of it's out of print.
Oh, that's the golden. This is the golden era of book collecting, bro. These books that we craved after when we were younger, that were like $60, $75, $80, $200. They're now like $5 to $15 shipped on Amazon or eBay. You don't need a new book. You're gonna bend the pages anyway. You're not collecting books. You just want some information. I know they're out of print. You're probably not gonna get them through typical channels, but we all buy from eBay and Amazon, and it is so cheap. $100 will get you like 7 or 8 great books.
Give me 1 second.
All right, so I'm gonna keep it going here while Mark is going, but I want to ask the viewers if you guys would be interested for Mark and I to start up a book club, like a book of the month club. So while you got up, I just said, hey, we should do a book club.
I'm
maybe
game.
Once a month, just discuss even like the oldest books. You don't have to read it cover to cover, just like some general feedback. Some books that I've gotten recently was Wayne Shang's Captive Marine Aquariums. That's on the way.
A good one.
Yeah, that's really old school. Another one is The Most Beautiful Aquariums of the World by Fossa and Nilsson, I think. I'm just trying. It's funny because they might not have any information that you can apply today, but having some of those reference points for how people did it back then and how we do it now helps you appreciate either going back to the old ways or how much technology we have today. So what book did you grab?
Okay, so it was funny because we were discussing the history of reef keeping, and I was like, I don't know if you're right about those dates, and so I went and looked up the book, and you were right. So, Peter Wilkins.
Oh yeah.
Stony Corals, right? And I was like, oh shoot, 92. Shoot, all right, And then you start talking about Apistos, and I was like, oh man, does Jake have this book?
I had it when I was younger.
Okay.
And I had a copy, and I think I lost it. And by the time it came to replace it, it was kind of it was past. It was just kind of expired. But that series from Tetra was really freaking good.
Yeah, these Tetra books were awesome. But we talk a lot about the Instagram culture and the perfect tanks, and everything's glowing in the dark. But to me, this is like the escape to that, right? Like at night, you just pull out. Well, this isn't a book about freshwater cichlids, but it's like science-y, and there's these awesome old pictures of tanks, and they discuss like how a protein skimmer actually works, and you're like, and it's a true like escape and a different lens on the hobby that to me keeps me sane sometimes when I pull these books out after seeing, you know, these fruit stand frag displays
it's
on
part of my
Instagram.
overall therapy
Yeah.
of just knowledge and wisdom. So, you know, hit us up in the comments and let us know if you would like us to talk about one book once a month, and just kind of share with you some of the books that you must have in your collection. So that's
This
I know
book,
we could,
this
we
is
could,
the
we could talk about
godfather of
books
reef
for a
keeping,
long time.
right? Like,
He's
you
up
know,
there. He's
I mean,
definitely up there.
wasn't he the guy that popularized Kalkwasser? But anyway,
Oh my God! Could you imagine being the guy who started
guy.
Kalkwasser dripping and dosing to a tank? I think he'd be upset with how people are doing it today.
oh yeah. But
He'd
that
be
book
like,
was like
You are not doing it
$15
right.
on Amazon used, right? I mean, it's like nobody
15?
wants, yeah. And
Oh
it's
my
like
God,
it's
yeah.
one of the original books on reef keeping. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, it's you're not gonna like, you know, wake up tomorrow after reading and be like, oh, I'm gonna make all these changes to my reef tank, but it's just
It'll
great.
get your gears spinning.
Yeah,
It'll get your gears turning and give some context to what you're doing or not doing.
yeah. So, and I guess for the podcast listeners, I was referencing the Stony Coral Mushroom and Colonial Anemones by Peter Wilkins, and then Tetra had a really great book on dwarf cichlids, and you know we were talking
Mhm.
about epistos the other day, but I guess we should
Uh,
dive in a little bit because we're kind of going
Oh.
there anyway. Oh, you got
so
one more, I think.
I
Or
got
mo- or
one more.
A few
man.
more.
I think
All right.
no, just one
Do it.
more.
No,
Actually.
let's do it.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just talk about some of my initial thoughts on the Neptune Systems Skylight.
All right. Ooh. That's like I may need another beer for that one.
So there's some qualitative things that are really neither here or there. That's just depending on what you like. You know, the super flat look. And one thing I can say is, like, I have no suggestions for the color. Like, the spectrum is on point. When having taken it apart, putting it over tank, and using it, I just can't help but feel that my overall impression with it is that this should be a $600 to $650 light. If this was a $600 to $650 light, I'd be like, boom, there you go. That's it. They nailed it. They just nailed it out of the park. I feel like the $869 price tag was just arbitrarily selected, not on the materials, but just because they think they can jostle themselves between a Radeon Gen 5 Pro and an AP9X, and it's just not the case. It's just not there, in terms of the premium factor, right? 869, that's a flagship light. Once you get all your hanging mounts, you're talking about $1,000 light fixture, and it's just not there. If this was a $600 to $650 light, boom, man, I think I could recommend this a lot more. And I'm going to be saying more. We got the video on the AP9X compared to the Sky, a spotlight fixture versus a total flat panel fixture. And it's got a lot of idiosyncrasies, which, you can live with or reject. That's really up to the personal user. For sure, it's going to grow corals. For sure, it's going to be fine. But just the overall feel of it is just does not deserving to stand shoulder to shoulder with real flagship lights like the AP9X and the Radeon Gen 5 XR30. You take that same amount of money and you buy yourself two Kessel A360Xs or especially two Radeon XR15s. Two XR15s will run circles around a Sky for about the same price. It's like night and day. Not even a comparison. They're not even like the AP9X and the Sky. They were both pretty well suited for roughly a 24 by 36 inch tank. Cool. I don't think there's not really any debate there. But if you got two XR15s instead of the Sky, you're talking about 24 by 48 or 30 by 48 or 36 by 48. You can light so much more up with the smaller Radeon than you can with the single Sky. And that's why I feel like there'd be a lot less room for criticism if the fixture was about $200 to $250 less. You're quiet.
No, I don't want to come off because I don't have as much experience with you. I mean, like here's a full confession. I've never run an Ecotech light. I love their lights. I think they're an amazing company.
Actually, you do.
I don't.
I do. Well, you have, because you used to have Hydras.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, they own AI. But I mean, I've never had a Radeon, I guess, is what I'm saying. But, you know, I know plenty of people that have had them. So I don't have as much exposure, but the one thing for me that always, you know, I always thought the ATI Sunpower back in the T5 days was kind of like a leveler, right? Because you had all these premium lights, right? And the Sunpower wasn't overly expensive. It wasn't cheap, but it was kind of like, it kind of hovered below in terms of an 8 by 80 watt Sunpower could light up a 72-inch tank, and I mean, bathe it in SBS coral
just
light
totally
everywhere.
Saturate every corner of the tank with light.
Yeah, and that fixture cost as much as a single Radeon, less, I think, less than a single Radeon XR30 or the new Sky, or, you know, even...
Okay.
And so
I've been with bulbs, and you have to replace the bulbs. And
Yeah,
your light
there's
intensity
the cost,
falls
but-
over time. And depending on the model you got, you may or may not have gotten, you know, some kind of controllability. Definitely no dimming. But
True.
yeah, so you.
But
just gotta
it
put
was
those
sort of
caveats
like
out there.
it was like a workhorse light that you could recommend to everybody, that was relatively affordable. And so to your point, if they had come in with like the ATI Sunpower of LEDs, right? Like something that was a couple hundred below their competitors that lit up the tank like it did.
Yeah.
To me, it'd be kind of like an end of story. Like you couldn't nitpick it the way people are nitpicking it on the forums right now.
If it was $200 less, with 6 to 8 channels of color control, some actual water resistance, you know, because all the electronics LEDs are exposed, and I don't want to go dive into that, but if it had that durability and it had the controllability from a controller company, I mean, like, what? 4 channels of color control? And they'll spin it in every kind of way, but it's just like, yeah, if that light was $650, it would be that ATI Sun light you're talking about, for sure.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I was
just
trying to find
jostle
like
in
a
at the exact
good
same price is
analogy or
not cool.
metaphor, but like just like that workhorse light, you could recommend to everybody, right?
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it
Okay.
with this, the ATI Sunpower. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's probably reaching back beyond some of the experience of some reefers, but that fixture was, yeah, you weren't going to get in trouble with that fixture.
No,
You weren't gonna get in
and
trouble.
it wasn't a complicated light either, right? I mean, it was like folded aluminum with a plexiglass. I mean, it wasn't. I hated mine because the fans always had to be replaced, but they weren't too hard to replace. I don't like the flat look, but it was always hard for my brain as an old timer to go, okay, so you want me to replace a light that was less than $800, and somebody's gonna call me out. I may have that wrong, but I think my light, my Sunpower was $800, and it lit a 225 gallon tank that was 6 feet long and more than 2 feet wide. But now I gotta like buy 3 lights that cost as much as that fixture, right? For me, yes, bulb replacements, all that. I had a hard time with that, and the prices on these lights keep staying high. When the Hydra 32s or 26s came out, and also the XR15s, my humble opinion was like, you could probably get away with like 3 of those, right? And so now the price starts to get a little more reasonable. On a tank of that same.
Into like the overarching topic that we're gonna have here in a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to make this all about the Sky, but that's just kind of my my general opinion. There's
I haven't seen it in person, so I'm trying to be relatively quiet about it. You know,
it's fine. Like the color is awesome. I'll give it that. Controllability is average because 4 channels of color control. So because they have the blues on one channel and then like the kind of purples or like indigo and UV on one channel, I like that firmly middle of the road. I like that deeper blue look. It's almost purple, but not fully purple. So with this light, you can't do that. Either it's like all blues on, or it's like really blue or like really purple. But you can't get that deep blue, that more royal blue that I've always really, really loved. But I think that's enough on this guy. Well, I'm sure it'll come back up in conversation, but that light needs to be about $600, and then I can really recommend it. It would be the leveler that you're talking about, like the ATI Sunpower.
I do think, I mean, I'll say this as a personal opinion. I do think people are nitpicking a little too hard on it. But, you know, I also know that, like, from a customer representation or PR perspective, you just got to roll with those punches a little bit too, right? And just say, okay, well, here's why we do this, here's why we do that.
You want a lot of attention, you should expect a lot of criticism, a lot of scrutiny. You know, the other qualitative thing I'll say about it is, you know, after I had it on there for 2 or 3 days, because we put it up there last week, I kept running over to the tank to make sure the pumps were on, and they were, and the corals were moving, but there was zero shimmer, and it's like really striking nowadays. What if those little shims things, they don't do anything. They don't do anything. And the fact that they're like replaceable with like a more opaque version, I'm like just laughing. The lack of dynamic quality of the light field is something that's jarring for people who've been using LEDs for 10 years, especially since it's surrounded, you know, on one side I got the Hydra 64s, on the other side I got the Radionics R15 Gen 5 Pro, and it just looks different. You know, I'm sure the corals will love it. I'm sure it'll look fine. The color's amazing. But the other weird thing that I don't know if anybody said yet, but everybody who's seen it, you know, over the last week, is something about that diffuser makes the water look a little cloudy. And it's on a system with a bunch of stuff. I mean, just like 5% more, right? The tank's next to it, crystal clear. The tank itself, you're like, I don't know if it's like his general glow that's happening because of the diffusing that's happening. But yeah, it's not awesome in presentation. And you know, I don't know that that's been said yet, but I think I'm sure it'll bubble up when people will start looking at them. You're like, we saw them at Aquashella and Reef Palooza, and you know, just like chalk it up to like a brand new tank being set up. Okay, it looks a little bit cloudy, but you know, the tank's been set up for like 24 hours, no problem. But having it set up on a system that's established with, you know, perfect corals all up in it, next side to side, you're like, huh, it's got a little cloudy quality. And for sure, it's throwing more light on the front glass, and I have to clean the glass on that thing twice as often.
Yeah, but, no, everybody was touting the T5-ness of it, and I just, you know,
I'll give it that.
Well, and I mean, I just called the Sunpower like the workhorse, right? But I abandoned that light, and I was stuck between a rock and a hard place because I felt like LED lights were very expensive for a while. So I switched to T5s, but I hated the dull, flat look. So then I threw my halides back on, and it, you know, it's just the cooking factor of just the heat and everything. And I was like,
yeah.
And eventually, like, that led me to, you know what? All right, I'll spend the cash and I'll go LED, because it was like the perfect solution where I got the metal halide glimmer, but I had, you know, kind of the cooler, less intense electricity and all that of the T5s a bit. And so I felt happy, you know, despite the sticker shock. So when somebody is like, oh, these are T5 like, I was like, I'm out. You know, I'm not going to ever buy these lights.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm not a T5 guy.
Except one of the biggest benefits of T5s is ultraviolet light, right?
Yeah.
A fluorescent lamp with no phosphors is a purely UV lamp, right? So your UV light that you get for your UV sterilizer is a fluorescent lamp with no phosphors, right? And so the thing is, there's UV LEDs in there. They're not like broad spectrum UVs, very narrow angle, narrow spectrum. So I think they're probably going to peak around 400 to 395 nanometers. But once again, they've got the light mixing chamber and they've got the diffuser, and you know, it's up to them to demonstrate that UV is actually getting through. Otherwise, those UV LEDs aren't doing anything. They're just giving you like a tiny shade of purple. But anyway, I think that's enough on the Skylight. I think that's enough for them. I think we have a really cool topic as far as like the main guts of this conversation, and it's about always learning. And just that's the cool thing about reef tanks. There's some lessons you have to learn, but there's a lot of lessons you don't have to learn. And I feel like the modern reefer who's, you know, kind of relatively new to it, is making a lot of mistakes that are covered in all these books. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I feel like it's like learning guitar, right? Everybody wants to learn that cool solo in that one song, and it's like,
Yep.
you got to go get the basics first, right? You gotta learn
Yeah.
how to do, and it's not like you have to
Stairway to
understand.
Heaven. You gotta go straight to Stairway to Heaven.
No, but and you don't have to know music theory, right? It's kind of like you don't need to know chemistry, all like super deep organic chem or something like that to be a reef keeper. But it's like I don't know, there's something to be said for like a whole chapter explaining how a protein skimmer, like what it's doing, or understanding, the bacterial processes, or just even reading these books with like the questions that these people had when they wrote them, and I don't know. There's a lot to it like that. There's like a foundation that you can't get from a forum, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely, man. I'm totally there with you. You need a framework to hang these ideas on. If you have no framework, no foundation, and you just taken all these ideas, and you don't know just like few basic chords, like if you're playing guitar or how to tune your guitar, you can't start freaking hanging these ideas and putting them in context with the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That's why I started like talking about the books. I started asking people, how many books do you have? And I was shocked that was the wrong question. The question was, do you have any books?
Yeah, but and I mean, you're absolutely right. Right now, you can get these books for a steal because they're they're used and out of print. But I also get that they're not in people's faces anymore. So like a person isn't naturally going to be like, oh, I should go get a book on that, right? Like, and we're all used to learning things on YouTube now, right? Like, oh, how do I fix my AC? I'm gonna go to YouTube, right? I'm not gonna go buy a book at Home Depot.
I did that about a month ago.
Yeah.
I just pulled up a video real quick and went out to my AC and started working on it. But that's also based off experience of kind of being handy with the aquariums.
True. Yeah. But so we were talking about lighting, right? And so I'm gonna dive right in. Like one that has me kind of just all over the place, where I felt like I had a pretty strong opinion on it, but I'm now starting to question that opinion, is PAR.
All right. So before we get ahead, I feel like I have an overarching bucket of basically most of my lessons in the reef aquarium hobby.
Okay.
Once you master all the fundamentals or whatever, salinity, chemistry, and the physics of the aquarium, I feel like virtually 95% of the problems that can't be attributed to acts of gods or freaks of nature or pests and disease is overshooting and overcompensating.
So would that be like an example of like rushing in to fix something, or like
everything? All right, here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just throw them all out there.
Yeah.
When we were trying to learn this reef thing as a community, it was just like, I need my lights. I need more light. I need more light. I need more light. I need brighter lights. And then we just very recently were realizing, hey, all these really colorful LPS corals and shrooms and zoanthids that we love to keep, they don't want that much light.
This is what I was gonna say about PAR.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, but you can still say about that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give it again a framework and a context. How about ultra low nutrient systems? Our entire youth, we were just like, oh, no phosphates, no nitrates. You just gotta do everything you can to keep everything as low as possible. And then these ULNS tanks came out, and you're like, oh, it's not possible to have ultra low nutrients. And then these tools came out from Hannah that was able to measure my nitrates and phosphates on multiple systems that I was feeding okay, and corals were doing fine. It was like 0.00 for almost all the tanks. Overshot all the nutrients. Gear. Everybody's like, oh, if a couple pumps is better, let me get more pumps. But having more pumps leads to more points of failure, and then you spend more time just futzing with like stupid equipment errors than actually managing your aquarium water flow.
That's a good one, actually. Yeah.
If a little bit of data is good, like from doing a few tests yourself, then ICP data with the whole freaking periodic table of your aquarium, that must be better. No, it's not. It's confusing, and it just distracts you from everything you're supposed to do. Okay, you get a little excited about dosing trace elements or feeding your tank. I have been guilty of overshooting everything. Nutrients, trace elements, iodide, flow, light, just almost everything. I feel like almost every lesson that I'm still learning is about, you get so excited, like, when you get some new food or some new additive or some new coral, you just want to baby it. Like your angelfish, like, oh, he's eating flake food. Let me just give him a little bit more. Let me just give him a little bit more.
And a little more, yeah.
And then next thing you know, I'm like, oh crap, what's happening? And
he's
you will
like
just
this fat and swimming
you will
around.
never get into trouble
Yeah.
by going slower.
Yeah.
You will never get into trouble by just going. I'm the same freaking way. My corals are super excited, super happy. All right, let me feed them a bunch of food, almost every night for like 2 weeks. Yeah, the corals got a bunch of polyps, and then they're super juicy. And next thing I know, I got a lot of detritus that's starting to lead to some weird bacterial issues. I could just go on and on and on and on, and I feel like that's kind of the state of play with contemporary reef tanks, where people just have just this weird like control room of gadgets and gizmos. Each one of them is doing probably more harm than good. All right, here's a perfect example, and I'm going to hand it over. But I've been thinking about this for a minute.
I'm loving
Here's
it.
a perfect example. There's so many things that the vendors in the aquarium hobby will sell you because they won't hurt your tank. More rock? Yeah, sure, fine. Of course, more is better, right? More sand? Deep sand bed? Yeah, sure, go for it. More cleanup crew? What are you going to do? You're going to come back at me and tell me you have too little algae and your cleanup crew is dying? No. No retailer is going to do that or say that. Funky nozzles for your return flow. Ooh, it does this and that. It's not broken. It can't really break. It might debatably make your flow worse, especially if you have a bunch of pumps working against each other instead of just having a fewer pumps working together. But I think that the the pinnacle example is seeing established reef tanks where people all of a sudden started to add a bunch of these biomedia options, from MaxSpec, from eShops and others. And I'm just like, your reef tank is already established. You don't need more biomedia. You're past the nitrogen cycle. What are you doing? That is one of the worst examples. Like, if you just don't need biomedia in a reef tank. Your entire tank is the surface area, your corals, your rocks. But adding big stacks of biomedia in your sump is
Have you
actually
seen the
counterproductive.
guys that, and this has been going on for before all of the media was available, they build like these egg crate cages and perfectly stack, is it Spiro racks or Spiro, what is it?
Zipper racks.
Zipper
Zipper
racks. Sorry, yeah. And perfectly stack them, and you're like, wow, like that's some Lego stuff right there. That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Not harping on them, but it was just like, I mean, like halfway through stacking those things, I'd be like, what am I doing? Is this really helping? But no, but you're absolutely right. So before we started doing this podcast, right, that was kind of a big thing for me because me, like I kind of disappear every once in a while, where you and I will be chatting, and then I disappear off the face of the earth because my work life gets so busy. And that just happens every year. And then like when I come back up for air, I check in with you. I think that's why I've been so successful at reef keeping, because my life gets in the way of me fiddling, and doing that. And then when like all of a sudden I got all the time in the world to fiddle with my tank, I start doing stupid stuff.
Overdoing it, overshooting every possible thing.
I have to stop myself, right? Because is it Malev? Like he's doing like a daily what's going on with his tank, and I've been watching it, and then all of a sudden, his salt mix, the potassium was too low, and he thinks that might have been the issue. And then I was like, I need to check my potassium, and it's like there's nothing wrong with my tank, but I felt like I had to suddenly go check my potassium, and I was like, I had to mentally be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're fine,
like every lesson as far as too much light or too aggressive nutrient removal, or just overshooting food or dosing. It's all overshooting. Every issue that I've had at the studio, I've relearned every lesson at the studio. I'm very thankful for it. I feel like I'm, after 20 plus years of reef keeping, I'm finally ready to write a book. You know,
Nice.
especially when we're talking about books. I'm finally ready. But I'm just like, yeah, every problem I've ever had is me just getting excited about this one new trick. There's one new thing and just overdoing it. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, that's sort of where I've been. Where, like I said in the intro, you kind of got me thinking about this because, I have these strong opinions about things, but then I'm like, in just passive comments in some of our reef therapy sessions, I'm like, man, for some reason now I struggle to keep mushrooms alive, right? So the blue ones do great, but the red ones don't. And then I'm just like, okay, whatever, and then I think about Micromusa and like some of those, right? And I'm like, yeah, I've always kind of had, they've been hit or miss with me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then I keep trucking, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, when you said I'm not okay with just being okay with this, right? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
and you were talking about, the some of the mysterious things that were going on with your hammer corals. I was like, well, yeah, like what's going on there? Like why? Like why do I struggle with corals that I used to keep easily, right? And so that's where, we were talking about lighting for earlier. It's like having scuba dived and snorkeled in some, not as many places as you have, but I've seen, leather corals growing in like 2 feet of water
Next to acros.
Right? And so I'd watch these videos on YouTube and they're like, well, SPS, they like 250 or higher par. And if you're keeping, softies and LPS, you want to shoot for 50 to 150. And I was like, man, whatever. Like they all grow under the same sun in the same shallow water. And that held true for like my leather corals, right? Mm-hmm. And in my soft coral tank, quote unquote, my SBS, the few that I have, grow bonkers, and my leather corals grow bonkers. But then I was like, well, wait a minute, maybe there's something to those par recommendations, right? Because I just recently stumbled upon an amazing picture of like some Rhodactis, right? And somebody happened to ask the person, like, what's your par at? And the guy's like 50. And I was like, all right, because I'm in the 200 to 300s in my tank, and my leather corals and my sinularia, they love it, right? And my SBS, they love it. But hey, maybe that's why I suck at keeping discosomas, except for the blue ones, because maybe the blue ones, in terms of phosphorescent, have the right sunscreen, right? If you think about it, all that par is in the blue spectrum, so the coral that's reflecting the blue light and looking blue to me is probably adapted to that shallow environment, but some of those reds and stuff maybe not. And so I was like, well, crap, maybe there's something for me to learn here, right? So
so when you were here, I was in the just earlier stages. I've been actually actively dosing nitrates, potassium nitrates in my tanks. So that's why, when the Melev stuff was happening, I was just like, I know I got potassium because I'm adding potassium nitrate. I'm like, I don't even need to worry about it. But instinctively, I'm like, oh, more is better. I have a 5-gallon bucket of potassium chloride. I could just go dose the tank, hit the tanks real quick. And then I had to stop myself and be like, no, I've been dosing potassium nitrate. I know I got potassium. Potassium has never been on my radar. It's never been a problem. It's fine. It was just a freak occurrence.
I'll tell you, my OCD brain was, because you and I talked about dosing potassium nitrate, and I'm in the same problem. My nitrates bottom out like crazy. My new tank, the nitrates are 0, even though I've been feeding my Angel like I'm trying to make him grow 3 inches in 3 days, right? But I remember you and I talking, I'm like, man, when I started dosing potassium nitrate, like my LPS corals, the tissue was just very expanded and like they were just luscious, right? And so then I'm like,
it was a more direct path than actually feeding them, because when I had the super low nutrients, like 0.00 phosphate, 0.00 nitrate, I would feed my LPS, I would feed my anemones. They didn't care. They needed it in the water, and I don't know, something about it doesn't make sense, but I can tell you from several tanks and several different groups of corals, they would need that nitrate in the water, which is weird because they don't have it in the ocean. So I don't know how you square those two things up.
This whole Malev thing made me go, Well, I gave all the street cred to the nitrate, but was it the potassium? So that's how my brain works, right? I start to like go, huh. Anyway.
Well, I got a bunch of ICP tests, sent off, so I should be able to dig deeper into that data. But I feel like, all right, tank crashes. They are the culmination of a series of bad or poor decisions. It's a lot of overcompensation. When people come to the studio, rarely, and check things out, I like to point out what they can't see. You don't see just all this crazy media reactors and turf scrubbers and refugiums. Every sump is empty save for a return pump, skimmer, calc reactor, heater. That's it. That's all you need. Like, all this other stuff, if you're not getting the fundamentals down, the other stuff is not going to help. It's not going to make up the difference, because you're not, doing ABC, XYZ is not going to fill that gap.
Well, and that's something that I am opinionated about, is the diminishing returns of squeezing all this technology, right? And that's where, we talked about lighting, and it's like, I guess if you want to grow acros in every nook and cranny of your tank, a T5 like light, whether it be LED or T5s, is perfect, right? Mm-hmm. And sure, having a calc reactor on top of your calcium reactor, and I just recently saw a tank that had those as well as was dosing on top of all three, and then I'm going to add a CO2 scrubber, and I'm going to do this and that, and I look at it like, well, your tank, you've made so many compromises to the overall aesthetic of the tank itself. Mm-hmm. Is it worth it? How much more color and growth and beauty in your reef are you really squeezing out with all those little additions? And would somebody that comes and hangs out and has a beer at your house even notice, or is he going to notice the massive science project around it, right?
Right.
And to your point,
corals will do infinitely well at, in an aquarium environment that has the fundamentals, on lock as far as temperature, nutrients, and mineral balance at a pH of 8.0, then it will at a pH of 8.4, where you have some shortcomings of all the basics. Forget about all those crazy
What if
trace
all
elements.
those things fail, right? You've created all these failure points, like, my calc reactor wasn't refilled, so my pH dropped, or you could go down the list, right? Like, you add more variables. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's the
more
other thing
dials that can change, right? Like, everything's just more chaotic, and like Ollie, right? Your buddy, who I've never met him in person, I've chatted with him online, but like, look at his tanks. Like, look at that video that you posted years ago.
Well,
that
tank's still going.
Yeah,
that tank's still going with the exact same stuff, the exact same light, 3 plugs, bada bing, bada boom. It looks amazing.
Yeah, see, that's, to me, like, people can argue about point source light and flat light's better, and it's like, yeah, but I don't want to look at it, right? I want to enjoy my reef tank.
I'll tell you what, man, there's a huge gap that I think 95.9% of the hobby is missing between what sounds good on paper, like convincing somebody on paper, and what actually works in practice. On paper, yes, it sounds great to have a CO2 scrubber and have all these, programming modes to, hypermile your reef tank. But at the end of the day, does it really work in practice? I could tell you no. I could tell you it really, really doesn't, because I've gone down all those paths and had more trouble, more headaches from overdoing it and overcompensating it than just mastering the fundamentals and just kind of pretty much doing it like we did 20 years ago, just with modern equipment.
Good examples for me is my protein skimmer. Is, I think the recommendation for my protein skimmer is probably like a 75-gallon tank, right? And I'm running it on probably 180 gallons. I really want to buy a new skimmer. I do. I want to buy a new toy. I want to get one with a manual wiper, right? But then I do my nitrate tests and there's 0, and I'm like, all right, well, so what metric am I going to use to justify this purchase? I don't have anything. Like, nothing's telling me I need a bigger skimmer, but I really want one. You know?
Speaking of protein skimmers, I've always said, when it comes to protein skimmers, like, no one knows what's an appropriate skimmer. A skimmer that is rated for 100 gallons that actually really works, regardless of the volume of the body itself and the pump. That skimmer is going to work way better than a skimmer rated for 300 gallons that kind of sucks. And if you put that 100 gallon, rated protein skimmer on a 300 gallon system, it's going to just be right there with the 300 gallon rated protein skimmer. There is no data. There is no metric. There is no even real science between what size skimmer you need on a given tank. Say you put a protein skimmer that's rated for 25 gallon tanks, for a 25 gallon tank, on a heavily loaded fish aquarium, like 100 or 200 gallons. That heavy protein is going to be so easy to remove by any skimmer. It's not going to get all the lighter proteins that a larger protein skimmer would get, but it's going to do more than nothing.
Well, yeah,
it's going to be so much better.
pH may go up, right? But what is my tank going to experience if I go from 300 liters per hour of air to 600? And I've had big skimmers on equivalent tank volumes, right? I had the ATB skimmer that was a beast on a 180. I've had big skimmers, but now that I've gone back to like a little skimmer for noise factor, I'm kind of like, well,
yeah.
What am I, okay, if I pop in one that has twice as much air going into it, what should I expect? Tell me, what param should I be tracking? I've got...
This is why I love the Aquavitro division protein skimmers, because it's like, all right, say you have a cone protein skimmer that pulls 1,000 liters of air per hour and has a 1 second contact time. Is that a lot better than something much smaller like the Aquavitro that pulls in 500 liters of air per hour, but it has a 2 second contact time? It's just so much easier to do with the Aquavitro than it is with the Hot Rod ATB style protein skimmer, with just like tons and tons and tons of foam and a huge body and a pump that's going to be very hard to replace. But I do think we're very much on the same page when it comes to that.
Yeah, I'm trying to, take a more analytical approach to some of the things that I just kind of shrugged my shoulders at, right? One being the corals that suddenly, like, why are those corals hard for me now? And one of those was like, well, everybody always said mixed reefs are hard. And I even last podcast, I was like, I don't get that argument because I don't have that problem. But then I was like, well, I kind of do have that problem, right? If I'm being humble, it's like, I'm trying to have a softy dominant tank, and there's like a whole group of corals that I struggle with that would be perfect for a soft coral tank. And maybe the problem is that I'm really good at growing SPS corals in a softy tank because my PAR values are very high. Like, what would happen if I dropped the PAR on my tank to that 50 to 150? Maybe those SPS would be less happy, but then maybe the leather corals are like, I can manage this, and then maybe the discosomas and the rhodactis are like, oh, this is great, and now I've achieved that goal, right?
You saw my softies in my middle coral flat, right?
Yeah,
they're exposed to super high flow, super high light, growing right next to acros. Through the side of your eye, through your what do you call that, peripheral vision, they look like stony corals. They don't look like junky little stringy finger leather that you're used to seeing, as frags from the fish store. If you're just looking at the acros and through the side of your eye, you're like, oh, there's more stonies over there. And then you look at them real close and you're like, holy crap, that's like Sinularia and Lobophytum and Sarcophyton, and those things are like rigid.
Yeah. And maybe that's what people should revise in these recommendations, right? Because when you say a softy tank, it's like, no, you put a leather coral at 300 PAR, it's going to be happy. It's going to get
I would
huge.
say that, first of all, zoanthids are not soft corals. Zoanthids are zoanthids.
Yeah.
Shrooms, they're not soft corals. They're shrooms.
Well,
they're
yeah,
corallomorphs.
yeah.
They're like a whole separate subgroup of hexacorals. And so they're not soft corals. If we're talking about true soft corals, Sinularia, Nephthia, Sarcophyton, Lobophytum, they have closer care requirements to SPS than zoanthids and shrooms.
Yeah.
like for sure, bar none.
I
And if you want them to look good, you got to treat them like it. Not
Yeah.
like as critical as for acros, but definitely like give those guys much better conditions, and you'll have a much better experience with your soft corals.
But it's in the theme that we're discussing, it was kind of like a learning moment for me to just kind of take a step back and think about it differently, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so give me another one on your end.
That's it, man. Overshooting, overcompensating, it encompasses all the lessons. Whether I'm messing around with new testing methods, or new trace elements, or new lights, or extra flow, or some new additive. That's how I sum up like everything that I've had to learn and relearn, all my lessons over the last, let's say, 5 years. Because it wasn't even on my radar yet. I was still making those mistakes, but I didn't realize that it just falled into, oh, well, if a little bit of calcium is good, let me add it some more.
Well, and I mean, so my coral quarantine is more than just a coral quarantine, right? It's essentially just a little mini reef tank where I can make or break things. And to your point, that's where I'm kind of overshooting things that are mentally just nagging in my head, right? Like, let's not go break the big reef. Let's go. So, I have some of these corals that I've struggled with, and I'm downing the par on them, and I'm going to start experimenting with some foods, right? Because I'm very skeptical of foods, but at the same rate, yeah, let me try. Maybe there's something to it. I'll give you another one. I mean, we already talked about the pellet flake thing. That was kind of a learning moment, right? Where it's like I got a little too excited.
That falls
and
right over
falls right.
overshooting.
Yeah, exactly. The other one that kind of got me thinking was the minimalist live rock thing, right? Which I'm a big fan of. I don't like the wall of rock, but I kind of went very minimal on this tank. And let's see, I've got 4 different types of angelfish right in there. I got a copper band. I've got 2 tangs. And I'm starting to notice that I think these fish might appreciate some more hidey holes, right? And it got me kind of thinking, like, I don't want the wall of rock, but maybe like gluing all these rocks together and not really creating as many nooks and crannies for these fish. Is that something that is lost, right? Because I have a pair of flame angels, and it's a really toxic relationship where he beats the crap out of her all day, and then when the daylight LEDs die down and it's dusk, then he's like, "Hey, baby, how you doing?" And they do their little dance in the upper water column, and they spawn, and I'm like, God, there's probably marriages like that, right? Abusive husbands that whatever. And I just felt
time apart. You need some time apart.
Yeah, I felt bad for the little flame, and I'm like, man, I wish I had some more hidey holes for that poor little girl.
Or you could add some more females.
I debated that too.
Yeah.
But in the cichlid keeping days, like I had a frontosa tank, and the way I eliminated aggression was removing aquascape, right? Like, if there's nothing for the dominant guy to establish a territory, like, this is my rock. There was no rock anymore, and then there was harmony and breeding. So I don't know, but that one got me kind of thinking, like, are we losing something by going minimalist? It might be better for the coral, but is it better for the fish?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that falls into like a smaller niche of people who want a lot of fish in their reef tanks. And I feel like nowadays the conversation is certainly dominated by people who have a ton of corals and just a handful of fish.
Yeah, again, going back to the Instagram tanks, I see some of these tanks, and they're so overpopulated with fish, and they've got like the negative aquascape, and I kind of wonder, like, how does that play out? I mean, when I've seen pygmy angels in the wild, they're darting in and out of rocks constantly, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know.
That's a tougher one because you're really trying to establish the balance between enough hidey holes, but not too much that you never see the fish.
True.
Or obstruct the actual water flow in your tank. But I guess the other thing I've really been trying to manage over the years is I had a simultaneous tank crashes happen while I was out of the country about 15 years ago, and ever since then I've been like super gun shy about what can trip up my reef, what can break it. And so I'm just like, just been removing stuff. Again, the overcompensating and the overshooting of stuff. Like, how many things can I take off and still have take away and still have a really great functioning reef tank? Because every single thing is just another potential point of failure that could create a cascade reaction that leads to tank crashes. I'm happy to say I haven't had any tank crashes since like 2004.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been very lucky. I'm not going to say it, but
Don't say it. Knock, knock,
I don't
knock.
want Murphy's listening, but yeah, no, I hear you, and I think about that in everything I design is part of the simplicity. And if you look under my tank, it doesn't look simple because I do a lot of automation.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the actual crap in the water that could fail, that's fairly minimal, right? But I mean, like we were harping on the Neptune light, I'm not a Neptune hater. I love my Neptune, right? I did a 10% water change yesterday by pushing a button, and to me, and Neptune doesn't have, the exclusive
But did you
on
do
that.
a 10% water change, really? Did you
Exchange.
really do a 10%?
All right, let me revise it.
exactly.
An exchange.
So for me, a water change, you take water out, you put water in. But if you're adding water at the same time you're taking water, you're also diluting the new water as you're putting water out. Is that a 5% water change now?
It's still relatively effective, right? Based on some of the articles
Based
I've
on
read
what?
by Randy Holmes Farley and stuff, right? Like they've done some math on it, and especially depending on. I mean, I pull the dirty water out ahead of the clean water, but yeah, it does mix in the larger tank volume. But I think the waste factor there is. It's been calculated in, and there's still value there.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I don't know. I didn't need to do it because for some reason, I suck at having nitrates, even though I actually want nitrates, and that's not a humble brag. Like, I want nitrates.
A pound of potassium nitrate is $20 for a
Oh,
lifetime
I have
supply
it.
on
I'm
Amazon.
just,
Yeah.
I'm
All right,
hesitant.
here's a great
Yeah.
thing. Here's a great thing that kind of ties into the overshooting part. When I got my potassium nitrate, I did the math on how many moles of nitrate was I adding to how much volume and how much that was going to translate to overall ppm. I did the math. I actually did the work, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, all right, I'm going to add this much to the tank and see what happens. And the best thing was just to start small. I started with 10 milliliter additions to a 100-gallon tank, and it was, it registered, but not very much. And I just very slowly, over a long period of time, figured out, like, okay, I can give this tank 50 ml based on my personal dosage or my concentration that I mixed up, and then just also wait to see how long it takes for the tank to consume that amount. You know what I mean?
Have you tested like right after dosing and then 24 hours later?
So I'm waiting to get some reagents for the new HANA nitrate high range checker.
Yeah.
Because that just sort of came out, but then the reagents were a little bit behind it. So I have the checker, but now I'm waiting to get the reagents to do the real math. Because if you're using, a Red Sea or NIOS or ELOS, it's just like zero, some, a little bit, a lot. That's the numbers you get, from just looking at the shades of pink. It's if you look at the pink from the top or in daylight or a slight angle, it changes for the same particular value. So I'm waiting to get those HANA reagents to get a little bit more qualitative stuff. But I don't want. I mean, I love toys as much as the next person. I feel your pain of being like, oh, I kind of want a new skimmer. I want some tricky stuff or some new toy to play with. But at the end of the day, I care a lot more about the health of my corals and my tank and the stability. And I love new toys, especially when they're gonna make some noticeable improvement to how I keep the tank or how the corals look or how the flow is really pushed around the tank. But at the end of the day, man, we were doing this stuff with maxi jets and mag drives and airlift protein skimmers and too much rock and no controllability. You know what I mean? And so I feel like, the whole control freak movement and automation, like everything I have is programmable and controllable. Why do I need a second controller? The only caveat is I have, one page of apps on my phone that controls everything, but I can navigate to everything I need to do probably faster than you can within one app. You know what I mean? And it's a firmly a first world problem to say, oh, I don't want to have like 3 or 4 or 5 apps controlling stuff. I'm like, you have ultimate control and programmability over your return pump, your protein skimmer, your heater, and your light, and you're complaining about having to open up 3 or 4 apps? Like, come on, man.
Well, and
Come on.
that's not what I use my Neptune for. Is I see people having a Trident control their calcium reactor. That would freak me out, right? For me, it's disaster aversion, right? Like you talked about going on vacation and tank crashes and all that fun stuff, or maybe I was thinking about vacation because I've got a trip coming up, but
Did you just take a trip to Colorado recently?
I did. Well, I'm trying to go to Hawaii, but the news has been kind of all over the place, and they're like, please don't come. And I'm like, well, I won't get my deposit back, you know.
Oh, yeah. We should go to Palau.
I would kill to go there.
Let's go to Palau instead when things get better.
But so I do more disaster recovery or disaster aversion, right? So I use leak detectors, and I can say, well, hey, if you detect water on the floor, like turn all these things off, right? Turn off your auto top off, turn off everything, and then send me an alarm, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that I do where it's an if this, then that kind of thing. I don't need it to control my calcium or that kind of stuff.
If this, then that without a controller.
Yeah, and that's where things are going.
My stuff is
IFTT.
steampunk. I know, but my stuff is steampunk, analog. Like, I don't have these cascade reactions. My auto top off is gravity fed with float valves. There is no problem. Do you know the worst thing that can happen to a float valve is it clogs and it doesn't fill up your tank. I have used float valve for years. That's the issue. The only issue I've ever come across is it doesn't fill up the tank. Okay, whatever. You have some air bubbles blowing your tank. Just actuate that float valve a few times and get the water flowing again. It never sticks on. But I also use good float valves, and I feel like every one of these disaster avoidance techniques can be implemented without smarts. Because smarts is where you get into trouble, and that goes right back to the overshooting and the overcompensation. I'm not saying that there aren't any cases where you want like a bona fide auto top off machine or real controllability. And I feel like the controllers, like that's really should be more for commercial spaces. If you're growing a ton of corals and your business depends on it, and you really have to get that critical level of alkalinity, magnesium, nutrients, whatever, and you need a Trident and keep your pH super high, but you have a lot of stuff going on, so you want to have some insurance with a leak detector, sure, go for it. But I feel like all average aquarists should not need most of those features. I feel very strongly
I'm
about
going
it.
to agree with you on that statement that I think the culture now is like it's an essential piece of equipment. For me, it's just another hobby, right? Like the automation, the programming.
I get that. There's a guy around the corner here who's like upfront about it. It's like, oh, I have a reef tank so I can have all of these electronics. It's like the total opposite. But he is so honest and upfront and candid about it. And you're like, okay. All right, I get it. You kind of have a reef tank, but then you have this giant control room that has all the bells and whistles that do everything. That's fine. But I don't know. Just don't come at me as a full-on reefer. If you have all this programming stuff, if that's what you're into. If you have a reef tank because you want to do the programming, cool. If you have programming because you want to do the reefing part, we could talk a little bit more.
Well, and that's where I feel like I'm on odd duck because the things that are actually maintaining the water quality and all of that is very simplified in my tank. And then I consider myself a recovering SPS addict where like I'm kind of enjoying.
There's no recovery unless you totally give up. You can't.
Well, when I went over to your studio, when I visited Colorado, I was like, damn it.
I gotta get you some of the Hoaxamai. I gotta get.
I don't have a tank for them. I that's what I'm going back and forth on.
It's super easy, man. I have it in my medium energy environment. I just cannot believe how happy and fuzzy it and how much it grows.
I do have a spot for a blue coral because I got this one little pillar, and I've got the Jason Fox flame on one end, and on the opposite end is the orange digitata, and right in the middle, I'm like, I could put one more acro here.
Oh, if you take the Hoaxamai, you have to take the Immortal Tort.
Oh, see, here we go. The rabbit hole begins.
But the Immortal Tort, you can put like lower down, and it'll catch
true,
up. It'll catch up.
No, but it's, the things that are keeping everything healthy is very simple crap. Like, I don't want a CO2 scrubber. I don't want a Trident. I think they're cool. And if that's your thing, like, that's awesome. I'm
I
more
want a
disaster
standalone
recovery,
Trident. I want a
Yeah,
standalone Trident. I'm okay with playing with one machine, but a machine that has to talk to another machine, that has to talk to a router, that has to, talk to an app. That's a multiple levels of stuff, man. If they made a standalone Trident, I would just be first in line.
I just feel like, I mean,
On one tank, not on all the tanks, but on one tank, just to get a little bit more of that data. I wouldn't feel like it was a necessity, but I feel like it would inform my reef aquarium experience. It wouldn't transform what I do, but it would help really just like even out the edges.
I think in your shoes, right, it totally would be an interesting data point to throw in, right?
Yep.
For me,
standalone Trident would be first in line.
Nice.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, I don't know if I took out some wind out of your sails, but
you actually dived right into the essence of it. I was going to go into like specific examples, but you actually hit it right on the head about how a lot of it is tied to just wanting to tweak or wanting to just, find something wrong or something to do. And it's like we get in our own way, right? I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, the overshooting, overcompensation related to everything has been, I wouldn't say a lifelong lesson, because the first half was actually learning the basics and the fundamentals and the corals and the gear, but the last 5 to 10 years has been learning how I'm screwing up by overdoing it. Pretty much.
And me, like, again, it's like, well, the things I shrug my shoulders about, like maybe I shouldn't shrug my shoulders and ask why, right? And get into it, because not that I need to solve these magic riddles for myself of like, this is why I struggle with red discosomas now. It's like, well, no, it's just fun. It's kind of fun to figure out the riddle, right? Like,
absolutely. That's dude. I don't think there's another hobby like reef aquariums. I really don't. You can dive into the history, the biology, the chemistry, the physics, the technology, and the intersection of all of those. I'm never going to be done. I will never be done doing this. Once I get to the point where I'm like spawning corals, I was like, all right, how do I get the most success rate? Or how do I cross different corals? Or how do I stimulate more fecundity? It's never going to end.
You'll laugh, right? No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. There's we're always learning, and we're always going to be learning. You have fluorescent protein infected corals that people call grafted. I'm actually going to be doing some actual coral grafts pretty soon on video, but the whole infection to protein in different types of corals, like that's just a whole nother world. Why do you have Acana canada with if you have a huge colony, some of it can be green, some of it can be gray, some of it can be orange. What is happening there? Is that genetic? Is that part of the tissue? The rabbit hole of reef keeping is lifelong, and that's why 20 years in, I'm not done. I'm just I wouldn't say I'm warming up, but I'm really finally, especially acknowledging and recognizing the whole overcompensation aspect of it is leading me to more success. Just be more tempered with my movements and be more, mindful of the changes that I make is leading me to more success. I love tweaking, but I need to tweak slower.
That's it. I'm not even going to say what I was going to say, because that was like the best conclusion to this discussion right there.
Imaginary mic drop. My mic is on the stand, so I can't drop it. Cool. Yeah, no, I want people to know that there is no end to what this hobby is about.
No,
We're always learning, and that's the fun part. And if you get to a point where you think you know everything or you know it all and you've never read a single book, that's sad. That's sad, because, like Bruce Lee said, be like water. Be an empty cup so you can be filled. Because if your cup is filled, then what's left to do? I totally bastardized that quote.
Yeah, I was like, I think it went a different way, but I get exactly what you were saying. And the other part is like we get into our get off our lawn stuff and everything, and I really appreciated that we sort of talked about the poxes in our reef tanks, but I also thought, man, it's like, we come off I'm going to speak for myself. Like I'll come off very opinionated about stuff, but man, I am the easiest guy to change my mind. Like have a beer with me at a Reef conference and change my mind, because I love when my mind is changed, right? And I love learning.
I'm pretty sure we need to do reef therapy in person, and just like kind of do this just for fun, just like have a little get up where we have a little booth and people schedule sessions of like 10 minutes. Bring me a beer, let's talk reef for 10 minutes, let's talk about what's ailing you, and then we'll on to the next patient.
There you go.
Let us know in the comments if that's something you think would be fun at some of the reef conferences, because I think we can make that happen.
Yeah, but after like the sixth beer and sixth
we don't have to
patient,
drink every beer.
Okay. My advice might get worse and worse. So
cool. All right, Mark. Man, I feel better. I feel therapeutified. I'm sure that's not a word, but you know what I mean. Yeah, we got it out there. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Yes,
if you're watching this on the Reef Therapy YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcatcher, make sure to rate us and share with your friends, man. This is some really good, just legit reef talk, and we need a lot more of it in a reef aquarium hobby. So.
And I did capture some questions, so we'll save them for the next round, because I think we definitely, we had a lot to say on this one, and I don't want to make it too long of a podcast, but we will go back there, right? Like we'll cover some of those questions.
Every few sessions, I think we'll drill through a few questions and interact with you guys.
Yeah, and I'll try to respond to some of the comments as well. I need to do my part in that as well. So.
I've been focused on content creation, not interaction, but I go back and read almost every single comment on all the properties. So with that, I think we'll conclude this session of Reef Therapy, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
See you guys on the next one. Thank you for listening.
All right, later guys.